We've been talking about experimental studies. These are studies where you introduce a new variable to see how it reacts with the members of your population. And the way we do this is we take our sample and divide it into two groups, a control group and a treatment group. The treatment group is affected by this new variable, they're introduced to it, whereas the control group, they are kept away from that new variable. And then at the end, you see how the treatment group reacted and compare that to the reactions of the control group. In this video, we're going to talk about blind studies. These are often needed in experimental studies, so we're going to talk about how to make it a blind study. First, we'll introduce what it is, and then we'll talk about how to do it. Now, sometimes when subjects are aware of which group they are in, this can introduce bias. It can create, they can get reactions that are false. Let me give you an example here. Let's say we're testing a vaccine and a patient comes in and you say, all right, you're in the control group. That means you're not actually getting the vaccine. We're just going to see how you react normally and then compare you to those who are vaccinated. Well, this guy goes home and all of a sudden he says, oh, I'm not vaccinated. I think I'm getting sick. I think I'm starting to come down with a fever or whatever the symptoms are. He's psychologically telling himself that he is reacting negatively to not having a vaccine. Or it could go the other way around. It could be that a patient is told, you are in the treatment group, you are actually getting a vaccine. So they get the shot and they say, oh, I've got that shot. I've got some foreign stuff in me and I'm starting to get queasy. And they psychologically tell themselves they're reacting to the vaccine. And there are 100 different examples we could give as well. So, how do we get rid of that bias? How do we make it so that we don't have these psychological confounding variables? Well, the solution is to make it a blind study. Make it so that people don't know whether they're in a control group or treatment group. In most experimental studies, this is simply, you don't tell them what the difference is. You don't tell them that they're in a control group and that you're doing something different for another class. You just don't tell them. Now, in other studies, this is a little harder to do. For example, the vaccines study that I mentioned earlier, this is hard to do because they'll know if they get a shot or not. So how do we make that blind? Well, we introduce a fake treatment, which we call a placebo. In the case of a vaccine, you have more syringes that are completely identical, but they have some sort of a saline solution in it instead, so that the patient gets a shot no matter what. And so psychologically, they're going to have the same reactions, more or less. But it's not going to do anything to their body. Okay, that's a fake treatment. We're going to call it a placebo. And an effective placebo really is the key to making a study blind. So with a vaccine study, it's great. I mean, it's what we always do with vaccines is we give everybody a shot and then we record, did you get the vaccine or did you get a saline solution? However, there could still be some bias here, not on the part of the patient, but on the part of the researcher. Let me give you an example. You're testing the vaccine. You want to see how it works. And this old 83-year-old man comes in who's very frail, doesn't look like he's going to do very well. And so the researcher says, I don't want to subject him to the potential problems of the vaccine. So I'm going to give him the saline solution. Right away, the randomization is destroyed. He no longer has an equal chance of being selected for the vaccine. Okay, so we can introduce bias as researchers as well. And so we introduce what's called a double-blind study, where not only do the members of the population not know which group they're in, but the researcher does not know what group they're in either. So for the vaccine study, maybe what you do is you have a nurse prepare a bunch of vials with vaccines, and then prepare a bunch of vials that are saline solution and mix them all together in a container. And then they're just labeled with a random number. Then when you, as the researcher, administer the shot, then you write down the patient's name as well as the number of the vial. You have no idea if it's vaccine or saline solution, and you give them that shot, whatever's in that vial. And then after everything's been done, then you can look up, okay, these numbers correspond to these vaccines. These numbers record to the saline solutions. Now you know who got a vaccine, who got a saline solution. Another possibility would be to have some sort of a third party. Maybe you make up all the vials and then have a nurse administer the shots, but the nurse doesn't know who gets a vaccine and who doesn't. These are ideas of double-blind studies. All right, and that concludes our discussion of experimental studies. Any questions, feel free to let me know. I'm always happy to answer your questions. Next time, we're going to come back in lesson 4, where we're going to actually start talking about graphing. And we will see you there.